Ethan pressed his forehead against the cold car window, watching the trees blur as his family's SUV made its way down the narrow road. The town they had moved to was much smaller than the city he had known, and everything felt quieter. Too quiet. His parents had barely spoken since they left the old apartment, only exchanging low murmurs every now and then. When they finally arrived, Ethan stepped out and took in the sight of his new home. The house was massive, towering over him, like a sleeping beast. The wood was aged and dark, the windows slightly fogged as if exhaling a long-forgotten breath. The porch creaked beneath his feet as he followed his parents inside. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something else, something stale, like a room that hadn't been lived in for a very long time. The furniture was old, but still intact, draped in white sheets that fluttered slightly as they walked past. His mother pulled one of the covers off a couch, releasing a small cloud of dust into the air. "It just needs a little cleaning up," she said with an uncertain smile. His father grunted in agreement and immediately busied himself unloading boxes. Ethan, however, felt the weight of something unseen pressing against his skin, an uneasy sensation that settled deep in his stomach. His room was at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper that peeled at the corners, revealing dark wood beneath. As he set his backpack on the bed, he noticed something strange. The door to his room had a lock on the outside, as if someone had once been kept inside. That night, after a quiet dinner, Ethan lay awake, in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house creaked and settled as old houses do, but it felt too rhythmic, like breathing. Then somewhere down the hall, he heard it. A faint scratching sound, slow and deliberate. Ethan sat up, heart pounding. The noise was coming from the hallway. He crept to the door and opened it just enough to peek out. The hallway was empty, stretching into darkness. But as he took a hesitant step forward, something caught his eye. A door at the end of the corridor that hadn't been there before. His breath hitched. The door was old, the paint cracked and flaking, and at its center, a small keyhole gleamed. In the dim light, Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. Something about that door felt wrong. He should have turned back, but he didn't. He stepped closer, and then, against every instinct screaming inside him, he lowered his eye to the keyhole and looked inside. Ethan's breath fogged against the cold wood as he pressed his eye to the keyhole. At first, he saw only darkness. Then, as his vision adjusted, shapes began to emerge. Faint, hazy figures seated around a dining table. His pulse quickened. It was his parents. They sat just as they had earlier that evening, their hands resting on the table, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of a chandelier. But something was off. They weren't moving. Ethan watched, waiting for a flicker of motion, a blink, a shift, a breath, but they remained eerily still, like mannequins posed mid-meal. His father's hand was clenched around his fork, unmoving. His mother's lips were parted slightly, as if she had been caught mid-sentence. A shiver ran down his spine. Then his mother's head twitched. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, but Ethan saw it. Her neck jerked slightly, and then her lips moved, but no sound came out. A wave of nausea rolled through him. He stumbled back from the door, heart hammering. This wasn't possible. He had just had dinner with them downstairs. Hadn't he? Ethan's stomach twisted. He needed to check. He needed to make sure they were... A floorboard creaked behind him. He spun around, eyes wide, but the hallway was empty. The air felt heavy, pressing down on him like a thick fog. The silence buzzed in his ears. Swallowing hard, he forced himself to step away from the door, away from whatever was inside that room. He rushed back to his bedroom, shutting the door behind him and jumping under the covers, his pulse still racing. For a long time, he lay awake, listening. The house groaned, settling deeper into the night, but the hallway remained silent. Eventually, exhaustion overtook his fear, and he drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning at breakfast, Ethan couldn't stop staring at his parents. They looked normal. His father sipped his coffee, flipping through a newspaper, while his mother hummed softly as she buttered toast. No strange movements, no eerie stillness. He almost convinced himself that last night had been a dream. Almost. But then his mother turned to him and smiled, and for just a second, only a second, her face looked off, like she was wearing a mask. The skin stretched a little too tight, the eyes a little too wide, the smile frozen just a little too long, and just like that, the nausea returned. His fork clattered against the plate as he stood up abruptly. I'm not hungry." His parents looked at him, their expressions unreadable. Then, in perfect unison, they nodded. "All right, sweetheart," his mother said. Her voice was normal, her movements were normal, everything was normal, but Ethan knew better. Nothing was normal anymore. And as he left the kitchen, he realized something else. He wasn't sure if these were his parents at all. Ethan spent the entire day trying to convince himself that nothing was wrong, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that his parents weren't really his parents. Their faces, their movements, even the way they spoke. It all felt slightly off, like someone had studied them and was now imitating them, just barely getting it right. He told himself it was just his imagination, that the stress of moving to a new house was making him paranoid, and yet when night fell, his feet carried him back to the door at the end of the hallway before he could stop himself. It was waiting for him. The air around it felt thicker, heavier than the rest of the house. He hesitated, fingers hovering just above the wood. Then, before he could think twice, he lowered his eye to the keyhole again. At first, the room looked just as it had before. His parents seated at the dining table, perfectly still. But tonight, there was something new. The chandelier's dim glow barely reached the edges of the room, but in the shadows behind his parents, something was moving. Ethan squinted, a shape, tall and thin, shifting in the darkness, almost blending into the walls. He couldn't make out its face, but he could feel its presence looming just behind them. His heartbeat slammed against his ribs, and then his mother's head snapped up. She was staring directly at the keyhole. Ethan stumbled backward so fast he nearly tripped. His breath came in sharp gasps as he scrambled away from the door, feeling like he had just been caught spying on something he was never meant to see. A cold sweat dripped down his back. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Ethan avoided his parents completely. He didn't want to sit at the breakfast table with them, didn't want to see their faces, but the more he tried to stay away, the stronger the pull of that door became. It was like the house itself was whispering to him, urging him to look again. And as night fell once more, he realized the truth. He wasn't just curious anymore, he was obsessed. Ethan tried to fight the urge, he really did. But as the hours crawled by, the need to look became unbearable. By the time midnight arrived, he was already standing in front of the door. His hands were shaking. His pulse pounded in his ears. He hesitated just for a second before pressing his eye to the keyhole. The dining room was exactly the same. His parents were still seated at the table, their bodies rigid and unnatural. The chandelier above them flickered slightly, casting strange shadows along the walls, and then Ethan noticed himself. He was sitting at the table, his breath caught in his throat. It was him, his exact image. Same pajamas, same messy hair, same freckles dotting his nose. But there was something wrong with the other Ethan. His skin was too pale, his eyes were too empty. His hands rested on the table, fingers twitching slightly, as if he was struggling to move. Ethan's entire body locked up. His mind screamed at him to run, but he couldn't move. He could only stare. And then, the other Ethan turned his head, turned it slowly, deliberately, until his dead Hollow eyes were staring directly through the keyhole. Ethan stumbled backward, a strangled gasp escaping his throat. His chest heaved as he gripped the wall for support. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the moment he stepped back, he heard something, a whisper, faint, garbled, coming from inside the room. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the message. They knew he was watching, and they were watching him. The next morning, Ethan could barely function. His limbs felt heavy, his head throbbed. Every sound in the house made him flinch. At breakfast, his mother placed a plate in front of him, her movements unnervingly smooth, like a puppet on strings. "Sleep well, sweetheart?" she asked. Her voice was light, cheerful, too cheerful. Ethan's throat was dry. He nodded stiffly, forcing himself to look at his plate, but deep down he knew his parents weren't his parents, and whatever was sitting at that table inside the locked room, it wasn't him. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. At school, he caught himself looking over his shoulder, expecting to see something lurking just out of sight, but nothing was there. His classmates laughed and talked like everything was normal. Maybe it was just in his head, or maybe they couldn't see what he could. Desperate for answers, he told his best friend Liam about the door, about what he saw. Liam just frowned. "What door?" Ethan's stomach clenched. "The one at the end of the hallway," he insisted, but Liam only shook his head. "Dude, your house doesn't have a hallway like that." Ethan felt cold all over. When he got home, he ran through every room, every corridor, searching, until he stood in front of it again. The door was there, just like before, but no one else could see it. That night, Ethan made a decision. He needed proof. He grabbed his phone, turned on the camera, and aimed it at the keyhole. His hands trembled as he hit record. Slowly, carefully, he brought the screen up to his face and watched. The dining room appeared, dimly lit. His parents sat frozen at the table, and behind them, in the shifting darkness, something moved. Ethan's breath hitched. Then, every single figure in the room turned to face the camera. His parents, the other Ethan, and the thing in the shadows. They all turned at the exact same time. Their mouths moved, but no sound came through, except one thing, a whisper, slow and distorted. "Ethan, we see you." The screen flickered, and then the camera died. Ethan dropped the phone, his heart slamming against his ribs. The whisper still echoed. In his ears, they knew he was watching, and now they were watching him back. Ethan couldn't stay in his room. Not after what he had seen. His breath came fast and shallow as he paced back and forth, trying to convince himself that this was just a hallucination, a trick of the mind. But deep down, he knew the truth. The door was real. The thing inside it was real, and it was waiting for him. No more hiding, no more pretending. He had to face it. Gripping a flashlight, Ethan stepped into the dark hallway. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were pressing in on him. The door loomed at the end of the corridor. The paint on it was peeling even more. Now the wood beneath blackened and cracked. It seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as if it were alive. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. He reached out, and the door swung open on its own. Inside, the dining room was exactly the same. His parents were still seated, their faces frozen in eerie stillness. The other Ethan sat between them, staring blankly ahead. But this time, the shadows behind them moved. Something stepped forward. It was tall, too tall. Its limbs were long and wrong, twisting at unnatural angles. Its face was a blur, shifting and flickering, as if it couldn't decide what shape to take. Ethan felt a scream rising in his throat, but no sound came out. Then, the creature spoke, not with its mouth, but through his parents. Their heads snapped toward him, their lips parting in unison. "You should not have looked," Ethan staggered back. What are you?" The other Ethan's head tilted unnaturally, his mouth twisted into a grin, but his eyes remained lifeless. We are the ones who wait. The shadows behind them crawled toward him, stretching across the floor like grasping fingers. Ethan turned to run, but the door slammed shut, trapping him inside. His parents stood up. The other Ethan stood up. They moved toward him, their bodies jerking in stiff, unnatural motions. Ethan's back hit the wall. "Let me go!" he choked out. The thing in the shadows only tilted its head. "You let us in." The air in the room collapsed inward, the walls bending and warping like a living nightmare. The lights flickered violently, the figures around him blurred, shifting and multiplying, their voices overlapping in a chorus of distorted whispers. "Stay, stay, stay." Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, and then everything went silent. When he opened his eyes, he was lying on the floor. The room was gone. The door was gone, and his parents' voices were calling him from downstairs. Ethan lay on the floor for several moments, his body trembling. His mind screamed at him to move, but he couldn't. His breathing was ragged, his limbs numb. The door was gone. The dining room was gone. But he didn't feel safe. His parents' voices drifted up from downstairs. They sounded normal, too normal. "Ethan, breakfast is ready." Slowly, shakily, he pushed himself to his feet. Every instinct told him not to go downstairs. But if he stayed here, if he kept pretending everything was fine, he knew what would happen. They would come for him. He had to leave. Now, moving as quietly as possible, Ethan grabbed his backpack and stuffed it with essentials. His phone, some clothes, his wallet. His hands were still shaking as he zipped it up. Just walk out the front door. Don't look back. Don't stop. His fingers closed around the doorknob, but before he could turn it, footsteps coming up the stairs, slow, deliberate. Ethan's breath hitched. He darted back, shoving himself into the closet just as his bedroom door creaked open. Through the slats, he could see his mother step inside, or at least something wearing her face. Her movements were too smooth, too practiced, like she had learned how to walk but never quite got it right. She turned her head, scanning the room. "Ethan?" Her voice was light, sing-song, but beneath it, something else lurked, something hungry. Ethan pressed a hand over his mouth, forcing himself not to make a sound. His mother's head twitched slightly, her gaze flickering toward the closet. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. And then she smiled, a slow, stretched smile that didn't reach her eyes. And then she left. The doctor clicked shut behind her. Ethan didn't move for a full minute. Then, when he was sure she was gone, he burst out of the closet, threw his backpack over his shoulder and ran. The stairs groaned beneath his weight as he bolted down them, every muscle in his body screaming, "Go, go, go!" The front door was just ahead. He reached for the handle. A hand closed around his wrist. Ethan twisted violently, his heart slamming against his ribs. His father stood beside him, his grip cold and too strong. His expression was neutral, unreadable. "Where are you going, son?" Ethan's blood turned to ice. His mother appeared in the hallway, her head tilting just slightly to the side. "You don't want to leave," she said softly. Ethan's body refused to move. They were too close now, too close to stop him if he ran, and as their eyes locked onto him, he realized something. They weren't going to let him go. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. His father's grip tightened around his wrist, too strong, too cold. His mother stepped closer, her eyes unblinking, her smile stretched a little too wide. "You don't want to leave?" she repeated, her voice calm, almost soothing. Ethan forced himself to nod, his breath shaky. I just wanted some fresh air." His father's head tilted slightly, as if considering. Then, after an agonizing pause, he let go. "Of course, son." Ethan resisted the urge to run. He forced himself to step back slowly, keeping his expression neutral. His mother's smile never wavered. She knew he was lying. His mind screamed for him to get out. but there was only one way left: the basement. He moved carefully, heading toward the stairs. He could feel their eyes on him as he stepped down, his heart hammering against his ribs. The basement door loomed before him. It was always locked. His parents never let him go down there. But now, as his trembling fingers reached for the handle, it turned easily. A warning shot through him. They left it open on purpose. Still, he had no choice. He stepped inside. The basement was colder than he expected. The air smelled of damp wood and dust. The single flickering bulb above cast long, shivering shadows along the concrete walls. Something was down here. Ethan's breath came out in quick gasps as he scanned the space. Old furniture covered in sheets, rusting metal shelves, and at the far end of the room, a second door. Unlike the rest of the basement, this door was pristine, white, smooth, exactly like the one at the end of the upstairs hallway. His stomach twisted. He knew what was behind it. But this time, he wasn't just going to look. This time, he was going to end this. With one last breath, he reached for the handle, and the light went out. Darkness swallowed him whole, and then, from the pitch black, footsteps, slow, dragging, getting closer. Whisper slithered through the air, low and distorted. "Ethan, we're waiting." His fingers fumbled against the door handle. He twisted it violently. Unlocked. The door swung open, revealing a corridor, long, narrow, stretching farther than it should, and at the very end, a faint flickering light. Ethan didn't think, didn't hesitate. He ran. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, leave your like, and see you in the next video.